We are honored to be joined by Dr. Gwen Westerman. Gwen is a writer, a teacher, and of course, an accomplished fiber artist. She currently teaches at the Minnesota State University at Mankato. Did I get it right?
Close enough.
And but her textile work can be seen in many places. She's won many awards. Her work is on display at the Children's Museum that we just talked about in the chat, as well as the Northern Plains Indian Art Market, the Eiteljorg Indian Art Market, and a number of other museums. We are honored to be joined by you today, Gwen. Thanks so much for being here, and we can't wait to see your work.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here today. So I'm going to share my screen and talk about how I'm inspired by the land. I've had a connection to landscape and prairie for all of my life, I guess. I was born in Camden, Arkansas. Don't remember much of that. Through the Flint Hills to Kansas City, and just really appreciating wide open spaces. Okay, let's see. There we go. Now it's advancing. Now I live in Minnesota, and this is the view from my front porch, and it looks to the southwest, and I'm just really blessed to have such a beautiful place to live. And those of you who haven't been to Minnesota probably wonder about that. So just to let you know, this is what it looked like last week. And I love the little thing on my phone that says it's minus 27 outside. And the real feel is minus 26. I'm not sure I could tell the difference. But to be able to see the sunrise, to be able to see the sunset, the horizon, means a lot to me. And snow, spring, fall, winter, and summer, it's just a beautiful place to live. So last winter, I opened my back door and this is what I saw. Snow up to the doorway, and living in a place with a lot of snow, I came across a process called snow resist dyeing for hand dyeing fabric. And once the walk is cleared away and I can get in and out, I have found using snow to dye fabric a really hands-on process. It requires some patience because you have to let the snow melt as you work, but it gets me outside, and I have most years a lot of material to work with. So to begin with, this process involves prepared for dyeing fabric, PFD. So it doesn't have any kind of sizing or coloring in it. And after watching LaShawn's presentation last week, I'm really interested in trying some organic cotton as well. But it's soaked in water with soda ash for preparation for dyeing. And I use a fiber reactive dye for this project, forest green and a deep yellow. And about 4 years ago, I was hand dyeing fabric in the winter, just like this. And I took pictures of my process. Same thing, gathering snow, coloring fabric, washing, dyeing. And of course, when it came time to prepare for this presentation, I couldn't find any of those pictures anywhere. I think somehow my Dropbox was purged for being too full. But anyway, that means I spent yesterday and the day before dyeing a new batch of fabric. So green and yellow seemed appropriate for spring and sunshine. And after the fabric has soaked in the soda ash, then you scrunch it up on a tray or in a pan. To prep this fabric, I've got lunch trays that I got at a resale shop, and they work really well. But I've tried twisting the fabric. I've tried tying string around it and folding it. And I like the way it turns out when it's just scrunched. And it's less work. So after the fabric is prepped, then I went outside and just got a dishpan full of snow. One year I left to go to a conference in March and the snow was deep. I came back 4 days later and the snow had melted, and the only place I could find snow in my yard was along the tree line in on the east side and the west side of my house. And so I was out there gathering snow from the tree line, anxiously hoping I had enough to fill a couple of dishpans so I could dye some more fabric before the snow was completely gone. And I'm just glad my neighbors didn't drive by and think that I had gone crazy collecting snow from the edges of the trees. But I learned my lesson that when there's snow, you gotta dye fabric while there's snow on the ground. The mixed dye, that I had mixed in with the water, I just pour it on the snow. And you know, that's a yellow color, but in the dye phase, it looks pretty orange. And then mix it up in the dishpan. The quality of the snow also affects this process. And when the snow is very dry, it seems to require a lot more of the liquid dye and is a little bit easier to work with than very wet and heavy snow. So I had too much snow in my dishpan, and after I put the snow on the first piece of fabric, I added the green dye in with the yellow dye. And then when I was looking at this screen, it's like school lunch, macaroni and cheese and broccoli. But I had got the 2 dishpans full of snow and ready to go. But I kept a log of all of the dyeing projects that I've done and the type of snow and the different effects of having very dry snow or pellet snow and very heavy wet snow. And so for those of you who aren't in a snowy area, you probably didn't know there were all different kinds of snow, but yep, there we are, your snow lesson for today. So here's the hardest part. Once the snow is on the fabric, you have to let it melt. I suppose you could put it in a microwave, but my microwave broke about 10 years ago and I never replaced it. And I'm not a very patient person anyway, so I figured this was a good way for me to learn patience. So I usually dye in the afternoon and then let the snow melt overnight in my utility sink downstairs. And about halfway through the process, there's the green one. I'll tip the tray the other way so that any of the dye that's collected at the bottom will run back through the fabric again. And there, next morning, the snow is all melted. You can see a little bit of debris from the snow, but that's not a problem because we're going to wash it, and it all seems to come out. So here's the first rinse, and you can see the color and the variations in the color. It's a lot like tie-dye, but not as structured. And then I hang it up to dry in the basement. And the light is a little bright here, so I don't quite get the depth of color. But you can see the variation there, and like the dark in the left-hand corner, the green piece kind of radiating out from the corner. A lot of designs there. So the first time I used hand-dyed fabric, as a quilter, you know, our first inclination is to cut up fabric and sew the pieces back together. And this is in 2010. I put the blue fabric that you see on the right, that's a single piece of fabric. No, on the left. And I put that piece of fabric up on my design wall and looked at it, trying to figure out how I was going to cut it up and make a series of quilts about the falls on the Mississippi River. And I looked at it and kept looking at it. And then I realized that I didn't need to cut it up, that I could use thread sketching and accomplish the same or even better design by using the variations in the fabric. So these pieces are thread sketched. The one on the left is my concept of the falls on the Mississippi River 10,000 years ago. And at 10,000 years ago, they were in St. Paul. And as the land underneath it eroded away, it moved upriver. And so combination of thread sketching and you know how we are as quilters, we save all kinds of bits and pieces of things. And I was trying to figure out how to make the foam at the bottom of the waterfall. And I saved dryer sheets at one point. My husband said, "What are you going to do with those?" I said, "I don't know yet." He kept trying to throw them away when he did laundry. But I repurposed some used dryer sheets to make the foam of the falls, and people always look at it and wonder how I did that. But now you know the secret, but don't tell anybody. The center quilt is Spirit Island and the falls on the Mississippi River in about 1770. This was based on a lithograph by Jonathan Carver, one of the early map makers in the area. And then on the right, this is kind of a post-apocalyptic view. One of the dangers that civilization brought to the Mississippi River is that it became polluted, and the freshwater mussels or oysters left the river. They died. And I thought, well, someday, you know, when all of the industry has started to crumble and we aren't polluting the river anymore, the oysters will come back. And there's a small piece of a freshwater oyster or mussel in that piece on the right as well. And good news is, a few months ago, there was a report that there are now freshwater oysters above the falls on the Mississippi River. So I was really glad to hear that. This is a piece that was inspired by Blue Mounds State Park, which is in the southwest corner of Minnesota, and there's a buffalo herd there. Although my park ranger friends would correct me and say bison, a bison herd. And when I was there to take pictures for an art project, I stood on a high point and I took photographs in a 360-degree view. And when I got home and looked at the pictures, I noticed that there were wind turbines 360 degrees around where I was standing. And I hadn't noticed them when I was there in person. And this area is called Buffalo Ridge. Buffalo Ridge runs from Iowa up through Minnesota into South Dakota, and it's one of the windiest places in the country, and that's why there's so much wind energy being. And this is how I adapted that. I included wind turbines and then the words from an old song in Dakota. And part of it says, Dakota omakuapi. Many things are chasing me. Dina kawakipeshni. I'm not afraid of them. Echinch hanach wani do. Because I still live. And that restoration bison herd there really inspired me. And then when I found the words to the song, it just reinforced animals. That's actual buffalo hair for the tail, and then 2 crystal beads for the heart. This one is looking out the door again. And several years ago, there were a lot of wildfires in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. And here in southern Minnesota, they colored the sky with this kind of bluish gray, almost some elements of orange in the sky, and it was almost like the air was colored as well. And when I looked at it, I thought, I have a piece of fabric that looks just like that. So again, this is snow dyed fabric, and created this piece. Wildfires up north, and the sun was just bright like that, and very well defined. This piece is now in the collections of the Great Plains Art Museum in Lincoln, Nebraska. Here's another piece. It's a little bit different from the others. There's no hand-dyed fabric here, but it's again one of the early landscapes that I made. I've also used paper pieced pattern that I created, pushing forward because I knew I could make it. And this is based on a Dakota story about horses carrying people from the Canadian border in Montana back to their home in Crow Creek, Nebraska. And commercial cottons. There are a lot of great commercial cottons. One of my favorite stores is Cosmic Cow in Lincoln, Nebraska, because it has all of these really beautiful tone on tone fabrics that I like to use. So return to Crow Creek. That's about 40 inches by 40 inches. One of my favorite pieces. Like I said, I use a lot of commercial fabric, and I like these kind of abstract colors and patterns. And I'm always thinking about landscape and how these colors and patterns can work together to create a vibrancy in the works that I make. This piece is the one that was commissioned for the Children's Museum of Southern Minnesota. And I thought long and hard about how we could make this an interactive piece for kids coming into the entryway of the Children's Museum. And I wanted it to be seasonal. And so I created 4 panels, and it's appropriate that the panel on the left is in the place it's in right now for winter, and used hand-dyed snow resist dyed fabric for the sky, and then the ground is commercial fabrics, commercial cotton. And these 4 panels take us through the seasons. And my favorite part about this is that on the first day of spring, on March 21st, hopefully there'll be some kids at the Children's Museum, and they pull the panel on the left off of the rod and shift everything down, and then put winter over on the right. It's always an interesting time to see the children get involved that way. And we're also working to create a poem for the kids to see when they come into the museum as well. I use a lot of hands in my art, and you can see in the center 2 panels are the hands of my granddaughters when they were 3 and 5. So they're in there as well. Another view from the yard with an approaching storm. We can see storms coming from the southwest a good 90 miles away. That's how open the landscape is here, but it's always a great relief when the first thunderstorm comes through in the spring, because we know that winter is truly over. And here's the piece that I just created last month called Prairie Storm. And that hand-dyed fabric has images in it sometimes, or figures that people can see. And if you look closely on the right hand side down toward the bottom, you can see white streaks, same way about right in the middle, and it almost looks like lightning when you get up close. I had a lot of fun making that, especially the curved lines and matching the hand-dyed fabric and the commercial cotton to create that depth of a prairie view in this part of the world. Just in case you think it's all snow, Here's our relief from winter right now. 3 fawns playing in the backyard. The mother is just to the right in the trees, and they're twins. And then there's that third fawn in there. I'm not sure if it lost its mother, but it was always with um, this doe and her twins. So now I'm trying to figure out how I can create a piece with deer, um, deer figures in it. They have such spindly little legs that it's going to be a challenge. To reveal themselves in this hand-dyed fabric are always amazing to me. This piece here is called Medicine Lines, and I could see kind of the general landscape of Minnesota, South Dakota, Manitoba in these places, and where the rivers come from the different Dakota communities. And so I've labeled the Dakota communities in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, in Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, and Minnesota. And you can see they're connected by rivers. And those were the highways before Europeans came here that connected these Dakota villages and communities. And so I wanted to show that that connection is still here even today. And just in very thin stitching in yellow, I've to help viewers locate where these spaces are. And then in the lower left-hand corner there is a blue hand, and blue kind of represents life and spirit. And a red-winged blackbird that has a blue crystal bead in its beak. One of the stories that I heard is that to follow the blackbirds because they always go to water. And when the prairie grasses were really tall and there were buffalo trails to follow to find your way, back in the 1700s and 1600s when Dakota people were here, it was hard to find a place where you could see very far. And that was the knowledge that was passed down, that watched for the blackbird. Here's part of my collection of hand-dyed fabrics. You can kind of see a lot of the variation there in the way the dye remains in the fabric. Like I said, I kept a notebook with recipes and observations on the texture and moisture levels in the snow. My favorite is the blue and lavender pieces on the left-hand side at the top of the stack. So I use that in a lot of my work. Here's another view of the horizon. Wide open spaces, lots of inspiration there. I know my dog and my husband think I'm crazy because they'll be all settled in reading the paper or sleeping or watching TV, and I'll jump up with my phone and run outside because I have seen something beautiful in the sky. When my son got out of the Marine Corps and he came home for a visit, we went to Manitoba. So we drove through Minnesota and South Dakota up into Manitoba, and he sat in the back seat. He was living in Connecticut at the time, and he said, "I can see the horizon. I can see the horizon. Oh my gosh, there's the horizon." Um, and he felt like he was grounded and close to home again. Um, can't see the horizon very often in Connecticut because of the trees. So after I visited there, then I understood his reaction. So there's a lot of inspiration for me in the landscape, the stories that I've heard about the landscape, the songs that have been passed down, the new songs that people sing about wide open spaces. Um, Most years there's lots of snow, so I can make a lot of fabric, but occasionally there are years where there's hardly any snow, so I get kind of stingy with how I use my fabric during that time. And this particular image here, no filters, no special effects. That's exactly the way it looked when I was outside, and it makes me happy. So I'll say to everyone that I'm grateful for this opportunity to share my work with you. Wokbida Ota, many thanks. Two questions.
Gwen, thank you so much. Your work is so beautiful and so inspiring to look at. We do have questions coming in, many of them about your fabric. So let's see, can you tell us a little bit about the size of the pieces of fabric that you typically use to dye?
They're 44, 45 inches wide, standard fabric width. And I usually dye about 1.5 yards at a time. I've tried to dye pieces in 2 yards, but it seems like it's just a little bit too much to handle. And 1 yard is never enough. so my compromise was about 1.5 yards.
Yeah, and can you review what you use as that base white fabric and how you decided on it? And then a question about whether you use sizing when you iron your finished products.
Okay, it's called PFD fabric, prepared for dyeing. So it doesn't have any kind of sizing in it, and I buy it on a roll about 30 yards at a time. And what was the other question?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I combine these two. Do you use the sizing then when you iron your finished product?
No, I don't. I just use my little spray bottle with water when I iron it out.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. And are the fabrics then color fast, or is that not as much of a concern because they're on the wall?
Yes, they are. That hot wash at the end includes synthropol, which is a chemical that sets the dye in the fabric. So I haven't used it for anything other than quilts, but it is color fast after that.
And then your commercial fabrics, you mentioned a store in particular, but where else do you source those from? Are you willing to reveal?
Cosmic Cow in Lincoln, Nebraska. I can only go there once every couple of years.
Your stash doesn't look like it's coming out of the baskets behind you. It looks managed.
Well, that's all you can see is just right here. But I've gone to lots of different places to get fabric, but I tend to, like I said, I look for tone on tone. Can't really see that. tone on tone and
Oh yeah.
not patterned fabrics, but just about all different kinds of quilt stores usually have those tone on tone solids.
Mhm. For those of us who are not quilters, can you talk a little bit more about thread sketching and what that process looks like?
Ooh, okay. Thread sketching. Um, you loosen up the feed dogs and use an embroidery foot. And basically, I just run the fabric through my machine this way, back and forth, to sketch um, the waves that you saw in the waterfall. Some of the rounder areas, but using that open embroidery foot, um, you can just move the fabric or the quilted piece underneath and make those designs, thread sketching. I've seen other quilt artists use it to create portraits, and it's a pretty useful technique.
Yeah. It kind of, I guess, connects to another question that has come in about your control as an artist. And do you, it sounds like that's a process where you can exert quite a bit of control over how things are going to come out. How do you think about that in relationship to your dye work? How much are you just letting the process happen and accepting the results? And how much are you trying to create a specific look in a piece?
The actual dyeing process or the way.
In the dyeing process, yeah.
Okay. I've tried to control that process because that's just who I am. And it doesn't cooperate. Um, I said I recorded the recipes, how many teaspoons or half teaspoon or tablespoon of dye I put into the cup of water before I mixed it with the snow, and I can reproduce certain colors, but not necessarily any kind of patterns. And so sometimes those patterns are what determine how I use those fabrics um, in a particular piece, or where I cut the fabric.
Mhm.
So very
Responding to
frustrating.
what the snow wants to do.
Whatever the snow wants to do, regardless of how I try to control it.
It's probably a lot of life lessons in that.
No, not life lessons I like either.
It's part of the maker's process, I suppose,
Yeah.
is learning things even we don't want to. Question from our good friend Carol Colburn about whether you have a community of quilters near you, or what your community looks like in that realm.
I have friends close by who quilt, but it's pretty solitary. Um, I don't participate in the quilt guilds that are close by. Mostly, I think, because I'm um, driven by deadlines. I'll think about a piece for a long time, and then when it's like 2 weeks before it's due, then I'm busy sewing. Um, but um, yeah, just friends who quilt.
Let's see, a few more questions coming in. There's a lot of questions about about the snow dyeing process. Is there an article or a place you would refer people to if they've thought about trying this at home?
There is an article in Quilting Arts magazine. I should have brought it over here. But I think if you just go to the website for Quilting Arts and look through the index for snow resist dyeing or snow dyeing process, you'll be able to find it. I'm gonna say it's like volume 46, issue 1, but that could be totally wrong. Check the index.
Yes. So
It's a
I know,
simple
yeah.
process, pretty simple process.
Yeah, but the technical details of exactly how long and when to take things out and what the ratios are can all be found in
Mhm.
that resource. We'll try to drop a link into the chat too, if we can locate that quickly. A question about where people can see your pieces and if they are for sale.
Um, my most of my pieces right now are in an exhibit at the Hillstrom Museum at Gustavus Adolphus College in St. Peter, Minnesota. Um, and it was kind of nice because they were able to borrow some pieces that are in permanent collections at the Minnesota Historical Society and the Red Cloud School in South Dakota. Um, and I haven't ever really thought about selling
Mhm.
pieces, although I might have to start thinking about that, you know?
Never say never.
Nope, I won't say never. I when I'm, like, at Northern Plains Indian Art Market, or at the Idle George Show, or, the Heard Museum, Indian Art Market and Fair in Phoenix, um, I usually come prepared to sell a piece, and of course, when you enter an art show like that, your piece has to be for sale.
Right.
So, that's usually where, I sell most of my work is at art shows.
Mhm. A question, I didn't speak to this in the introduction, but inquiring about your Dakota ancestry and how that connects to your quilting.
Mm. My father and mother met at Haskell Indian Institute. My mother's family is from Oklahoma, my father's family. Growing up, I was told was from South Dakota. And so I've always been um, connected to that heritage, that culture, that background from both sides of my family. And I um, finished school at Oklahoma State University and moved up the road to Kansas City after I finished my master's and worked in financial services for a long time. And then moved up the road again to Mankato, which I had only known from Little House on the Prairie, because that's where Mom and Pa went when they wanted to get away from the kids.
True.
um, and um, I've never lived any further than 45 miles away from Interstate 35. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but it explains my penchant for prairie. Um, and when I called my dad and my uncle um, to tell them that I got the job in Mankato, they said, "Well, we'll see how long you last," because I didn't know about the history here, and that this was and is Dakota homeland. So basically, I moved home when I came to the Minnesota River Valley, and the landscape here is marked with our language in the place names. Mankato, Makato is a Dakota word. Uh, Chaska or Cheske, Winona. Um, the place names are everywhere. And then farther up north, Ojibwe language marks the landscape. And so then it became much deeper and more resonant with me when I was in this place, physically in this place. and made that connection to the land and the history that's here, and the stories that are associated with our connection to this land.
Thank you for sharing. I think our time is just about wrapping up, and we have addressed almost everything here. Let's see. One more good question. How long have you been making landscape quilts? And did you transition to this art form from making piecework quilts earlier?
Um, I didn't start quilting until 2000. My grandma was a quilter. My mom taught me to sew when I was about 11 years old, so I'd always made my own clothes, but I hadn't ever made a quilt until 2000, and did traditional piece quilts patterns. And then I was asked to contribute work to an exhibit in Minneapolis called Original Green, and it was for Native artists, and it had to do with the Mississippi River. And so that was my first foray into landscapes. And I have a friend who's a watercolor artist, and he created the image for the cover of my poetry book. And I always told him I wish I were a watercolor painter. And he said, "You are, you just paint with fabric," which I really appreciated him saying that to me. And so now I'd say it's probably 50-50 in terms of what of the kind of work I do. About 50% of it is now landscape. It's also gratifying because it doesn't take as long as like a big pieced star quilt or another kind of traditional pattern. Instant gratification. There's where I get back at the snow dye process.
Well, Gwen, we really appreciate you sharing your stories and your images with us today. I
Thank you.
certainly hope that in the not very distant future, we'll be able to welcome you to our campus. Gwen and I have been scheming about a possible quilting course at North House. Nothing is solid yet, but we're certain that there may be a few of you out there who would like to have the opportunity to work with Gwen in that capacity. So we'll try and make something happen. Thanks again to everybody for joining us. We so appreciate it. I hope you're able to join us tomorrow night for Linda Johnson Mork. And thanks to all of the wonderful supporters of North House that make it possible for us to bring this type of programming to you. Have a good afternoon, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you all.